This one's been coming down the tracks for quite some time, but it's arrived. Swimming's world governing body, Fina, has now formally voted to effectively ban transgender athletes from entering into women's elite races by creating an open category.
The new policy means that athletes must have completed their transition by the age of 12 in order to be able to race as a woman in elite competition. So, the question is, will that change make the sport fairer for all competitors? Joining us to discuss this is former badminton Olympic silver medalist Gail Ems, who says it is actually just common sense at last. We're also joined by the broadcaster India Willoughby, who thinks that this new policy is actually a sign of ignorance. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for this, for being on to talk about this. India, let me come to you first. This debate has come down to essentially the detail of the science that we have available at the moment. That's what these governing bodies are looking at. And I just have to put this to you in that the British Medical Journal last year did a study of hormone therapy and the effect it has on an athlete's body over time. And they concluded that 2 years after starting and finishing your transition, trans women still retained an advantage in run times on the mile and a half run compared to the average time for cis women, as it's called. So the point being that these governing bodies have to look at the science, don't they? That if there is an advantage to having gone through male puberty, that even after all the hormones and the therapy and the transition has been given, that person still has a defined scientific advantage in terms of speed. They just can't let that person compete in the same category.
Well, thank you, Ranveer and Richard, for having me on. One thing I will say, and I think that is a great study, that's the biggest study of its kind, 250 trans athletes monitored over a 2-year period. But the conclusion was actually, and I've got it here, this is a statement on an interview from Dr. Tim Roberts, who conducted the study, and he said for the first 2 years after starting hormones, trans women are able to do 10% more than cis women who are women who are not trans. After 2 years, Roberts told NBC News they were fairly equivalent to cisgender women. And I think the truth of the matter here, you're saying that they've looked at the science, but actually the bulk of the science actually supports trans women. If you look at the fact that trans women have been able to compete now in professional sport for over 50 years, since Rennie Richards back in the 70s, and during that half century, there have been no trans champions, there have been no trans medal winners. And if I said to you, there's a demographic out there in society who want to take part in sport, they've never been able to win a medal, they're rubbish at sport, but you know what? They have an unfair advantage, we're going to ban them. You would think that was ludicrous. And very quickly, the fact that supposedly the rule is going to be that you have to complete your transition by the age of 12, it just proves that they haven't looked at the science. They know nothing about it. It's impossible to transition at 12. And if you think the people who are campaigning against trans women at the moment participating would be in favour, even if it was possible, of somebody transitioning at 12, you've got to be kidding me.
All right, let's go to Gail then. What she's saying effectively is that the science is wrong, or it's misreported. I mean, it's certainly been very, very widely reported that anybody who goes through male puberty will have permanent increased density of bone and will be basically larger in terms of muscle mass. Would you argue with what she's just said and accept what the proposition that I've just made on behalf of the research?
I would completely argue, yes. I mean, it's shown that when a biological male goes through puberty, there is an advantage with height, bigger heart, bigger lungs. You know, I'm 5'3", for instance. You know, I am, sort of the average height for a woman. It's just frustrating. And the science, the good thing about science is we can always debate topics. And this is why we are not at that point yet to say that we definitely know. The one I just want to say that inclusion and fairness, they are not compatible at the moment, okay? So we just have to make sure We have to be fair in sport, in elite sport. That's all. I'm just trying to kind of get that point across. It's not about living life or doing sport in general.
Well,
this is just
fairness. What do you mean by fairness? I mean, what advantage do trans athletes at pro level have at the moment? Can you tell me any pro champions in the professional field over the last 50 years?
It's not about whether there's been pro champions or not. It's about the kind of respect on a court. If I'm on a badminton court, I know my opponents. I know I'm the best female in the mixed doubles partner. I was number one in the world. I was the best in the world as a girl, female, biological girl. I've competed against girls in a fair environment. Sport is about fair play. You know, you have to match. There's a reason why we don't put 18-year-old boys in an under-12s rugby match, because it's not fair. You know, you have to try and compete on the same level as you go through. That's the whole point of it. You have these categories for a reason. So you can say you're the best under 13, you're the best in under 22s, you can say the best in the world.
Let me just ask you a question here about what Fina's decided to do, because this is about the world governing body of swimming. That, you know, that is the headline this morning. And of course, cycling has made a different decision, which is to double the extended time that you have to have been through the transition before you're allowed to compete. So all the governing bodies around elite sport are trying to feel their way around how to be inclusive and fair. What Fina have said is that in the swimming, at the elite level, there will be an open category potentially, which will allow trans swimmers to go into that category, and it's an open category. What do you make of that? That sounds to the layperson quite fair.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you've raised this point, Ranvi. I'd be interested to know where they intend to hold this event. Are they going to hold it in Richard Madeley's back garden, maybe a telephone box? 0.25% is the world population of trans women, which is what we're actually talking about. Not that full 0.25% are actually involved in sport. So it's just not possible in any mean or manner to actually do that thing. But just coming back on the thing, I think the big problem here is that in everybody's mind's eye, they seem to think that this is men v women, and that's what we've just heard there. I understand why it happens. You know, just Gail just mentioned it there about young athletes being divided into categories. We're not talking about men v women. We're talking about women who happen to be trans, who had transitioned. And you've got to say, where is the fairness for them? You cannot. This is effectively a world blanket ban on trans participation, because trans people can't transition at 12.
No one is banning trans women from sport. No one's banning trans women from swimming. It's the elite, the elite races where you have to be fair on a biological scale, okay? No one's banning anyone from
There's nobody in elite swimming that's trans. There never has been. I can give you a very quick example here. Leah Thomas, the other trans athlete. Sorry.
Well, yeah, and exactly, and that's why they're making the decisions now, because they've had to look at this and how far ahead she is, and is that fair to the other women competing? There's been so many vocal, you know, sort of, you know, what we need to know. It's everyone. We're not there at that stage to be. It's not inclusive at all. It's not inclusion and fairness are not compatible.
All right, listen, guys, we're going to have to bring the curtain
really
on
interesting
this,
point,
But it's a very interesting point. But just to come back briefly to India, the thing is, it does look as if you've lost the argument, doesn't it? I don't mean the argument here on the programme, but generally because Fina have made this ruling now, and there's not much you can do to row it back, is there?
Well, I don't feel we have lost the argument at all. You know, at the end of the day, I think trans people are very happy to sit back and let the science and the data speak for itself. It's there for everybody to see. It's very interesting that it's the opposite side that are campaigning against trans people participating at the top end of sport are the ones who are doing the lobbying.
Well, look, that was a very interesting discussion, and we kind of kept the lid on it, which makes a change, because these discussions are very, very contentious and they can often spin out of control. But that was a very frank and interesting exchange of views. We appreciate it. Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.